The Orinthia Conference Hall blazed with the metallic brilliance of 1,000 stars. Its high, arched ceilings capturing the light of 3 suns that bathed the neutral, diplomatic planet. Representatives from 17 advanced civilizations filled the chamber, their varied physiologies accommodated by adaptive seating arrangements that shifted and morphed to support tentacles, exoskeletons, and every manner of appendage. The Galactic Knowledge Consortium had convened its 472nd cycle meeting, bringing together the most advanced species of the Andron Galaxy. Prophet Aerith Serak stood at the observation deck, his slender form casting a long shadow across the polished floor. 6 translucent tendrils extended from his cranial ridge, each one pulsing with the blue-white energy that marked members of the Voxic race. As the consortium's most renowned psychological profiler, Aerith had earned his title through centuries of accurate predictions about newly contacted species. His ability to synthesize cultural, biological, and psychological data into behavioral forecasts had saved countless lives and prevented dozens of interspecies conflicts. Today, however, Aerith felt a familiar tension in his neural pathways, the sensation his kind experienced when confronting ethical dissonance. His tendrils curled slightly inward, a physical manifestation of his inner turmoil. "Prophet Serak," came a voice from behind him. "The Council awaits your assessment." Captain Lyra Venn approached, her humanoid features set in the neutral expression she maintained for official business. The captain served as Aerith's transport commander, but over 17 cycles of service together, they had developed a quiet alliance that sometimes bordered on friendship, a rarity between their species. "The Supreme Admiral has already presented his case," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It would be beneficial if you arrived before the preliminary vote." Aerith's central tendril flickered with acknowledgement. "Then we must not delay." The inner chamber of the consortium glowed with the combined light of hundreds of data projections, 3-dimensional charts, biological analyses, and tactical simulations hovered above the circular table where 23 senior representatives sat in judgment. At the head of the assembly, Supreme Admiral Koran's massive form dominated the space. A member of the Draxus species, Koran possessed the intimidating physique of an apex predator, armored exoskeleton, 4 powerful arms, and a cranial crest that signaled his elevated military rank. 2 of his arms gestured emphatically at a rotating hologram of a small, blue-green planet. "The Umari have demonstrated aggressive territorial expansion." Koran's voice boomed across the chamber, the universal translator giving his words a metallic edge. "Their recent acquisition of sublight travel technology puts them merely decades away from achieving interstellar capability. Our predictive models suggest a 93% probability that their first contact with any of our member species will result in hostility." Counselor Drex, a longtime supporter of Koran's militaristic approach, leaned forward. His gelatinous form rippled with agreement. "The Supreme Admiral's recommendation is sound. Preventative action now would save countless lives across multiple species in the future." Aerith moved silently to his designated position, noting the way several council members shifted uncomfortably. The consortium had never authorized preemptive action against a pre-interstellar civilization before. Such an act would violate their most sacred principle, the right of sentient species to develop without interference until they achieve the technological threshold for consortium contact. "Supreme Admiral," Aerith spoke, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the chamber. "May I inquire about the basis for your probability assessment?" Koran's upper right arm gestured dismissively. "The Umari have engaged in 7 planetary civil conflicts in their last century alone. Their dominant governance structures prioritize resource acquisition over cooperative development. Their communication patterns show inherent aggression markers. The data is clear." Aerith moved to the central projection area, his tendrils interfacing with the holographic controls. "With the Council's permission, I would like to present an alternative analysis. The head counselor, an ancient being from the crystalline phaeton species, inclined her faceted head. The prophet has the floor. The hologram shifted, dissolving Quran's tactical displays and replacing them with intricate neurological and sociological patterns. Aerith's tendrils pulsed as he transferred data directly from his neural network to the projection system. The Umari are indeed a complex species, but their aggression patterns are primarily defensive and intraspecific. Aerith began. Their territorial behaviors exist within a complex social framework that values ancestral connections to specific geographical regions. What appears as resource acquisition is actually a deeply rooted cultural preservation instinct. Aerith's display shifted to show the neural architecture of typical Umari brain patterns. Their cognitive structures have evolved significantly over the last 3 centuries. Violence among their kind has decreased by 62% in that time frame. Their art, literature, and philosophy increasingly emphasize cooperative principles. Quran's exoskeleton rattled slightly, a sign of irritation. Pretty patterns do not negate the threat they pose. Prophet Sirach consistently underestimates the dangers posed by emergent civilizations. His sympathy for lesser species clouds his judgment. Aerith remained impassive, though his tendrils flickered more rapidly. I have prepared a comprehensive behavioral forecast based on 73 distinct cultural and biological markers. If I may. The head counselor gestured approval, and Aerith expanded his projection to fill the chamber. A complex, branching timeline appeared, showing multiple potential first contact scenarios with the Umari. In 68% of potential futures, peaceful contact can be established if approached correctly. Aerith explained, highlighting one branch of the projection. Their response to external threat, however, shows a disturbing pattern. The timeline shifted, displaying a pulsing red pathway. If attacked without provocation, the Umari demonstrate extraordinary psychological resilience. Unlike many species who might surrender when faced with superior technology, the Umari would likely unify against external threats in ways that transcend their internal conflicts. Aerith's central tendril extended fully, a sign of absolute certainty among his kind. My analysis indicates that if we strike first, they will never stop. Not until they achieve vengeance or extinction. Their neural pathways would fundamentally reorganize around resistance. A murmur passed through the council. Such a definitive statement from the typically cautious prophet carried significant weight. Preposterous, Corin dismissed. No pre-interstellar species could pose a threat to the consortium. A swift, decisive strike would eliminate potential future conflict. We target their major population centers, their technological hubs, and their military installations. The operation would be complete within 14 standard cycles. Aerith's tendrils dimmed slightly. Supreme Admiral, with respect, you misunderstand the nature of the threat. It is not their current capability that concerns me, but what they would become if attacked. My predictive models show they would dedicate their entire civilization to retribution. Enough! Corin slammed one massive arm on the table. The prophet deals in possibilities and sentimentality. I deal in strategic realities. The Umari present a clear future threat. Our duty is to neutralize it before it materializes. The head counselor's crystalline form refracted light in a pattern that signaled for order. We will now vote on the Supreme Admiral's recommendation for preemptive action against the Umari civilization. Aerith watched in mounting despair as the votes were tallied. Corin's influence had grown considerably in recent cycles. His promises of security appealing to council members, concerned about the increasing frequency of conflict in the galaxy's outer regions. When the final count was displayed, the Supreme Admiral's proposal had passed by a narrow margin. The Council has spoken, the head counselor announced. Operation Preventative Shield will commence in 12 standard cycles. Supreme Admiral Korin will oversee all tactical operations. Prophet Serac will be reassigned to the Observation Corps to document the effectiveness of our intervention. Aerith's tendrils curled tightly against his cranial ridge, a sign of profound distress among his kind. Counselors, I must formally register my objection to this action. The path we now choose will lead to consequences beyond our current ability to predict. Your objection is noted, the head counselor replied. However, the Council has determined that the security of established civilizations must take precedence over theoretical concerns. As the Council chamber emptied, Captain Ven approached Aerith, keeping her voice low. I'm sorry, Prophet. I have been ordered to transport you to the forward observation station near the Umari system. Then we should depart immediately, Aerith replied, his voice carrying a weight Ven had never heard before. If I cannot prevent this atrocity, I must at least bear witness to it. The journey to the Umari system took 8 standard cycles aboard Captain Ven's vessel. The Stellar Observer, the ship, designed primarily for scientific and diplomatic missions, felt uncomfortably repurposed as it joined the growing fleet of consortium military vessels gathering at the edge of the system. Aerith spent most of the journey in his meditation chamber, his tendrils connected to data streams analyzing everything known about Umari civilization. He emerged only for mandatory briefings, where his official status had been reduced from prophet to observer, a demotion that stripped him of his advisory authority. We'll reach the observation position in 6 hours, Captain Ven informed him as he entered the bridge. The Supreme Admiral's flagship has already arrived and established the command center. Has the operation timeline been finalized? Aerith asked. Ven nodded, bringing up a tactical display. First strikes begin in 26 hours. They're targeting defensive installations first, then communication networks, followed by major technological centers. And civilian populations? Ven hesitated. Official language describes precision strikes to minimize non-combatant casualties. But the projected death toll? She trailed off, unwilling to voice the numbers. Show me, Aerith said quietly. The display changed, revealing casualty projections that numbered in the hundreds of millions. This is not prevention, Aerith said, his tendrils dimming to an ashen gray. This is extinction. The Supreme Admiral has classified this as a Type 7 intervention, Ven replied, using the consortium's clinical terminology for operations designed to fundamentally reshape a civilization's development path. The goal is not complete elimination, but rather strategic devastation sufficient to prevent technological advancement for at least 10 generations. Aerith finished. I am familiar with the protocol. I helped draft it for use against non-sentient threats, not developing civilizations. An alert chimed on the bridge console. We're being hailed by the command ship, Ven announced. The Supreme Admiral requests your presence for the pre-operation briefing. As an observer only, I presume. Yes, your input has been categorized as non-essential. Aerith's tendrils curled tightly. Then let us not keep the Supreme Admiral waiting. The command center aboard Koran's flagship, the Inevitable Justice, buzzed with the coordinated activity of hundreds of tactical officers from various consortium species. Massive holographic displays showed detailed maps of the Umari planet, with primary targets highlighted in pulsing red. Supreme Admiral Koran stood at the center of the operation, his 4 arms manipulating different control interfaces simultaneously. He acknowledged Aerith's arrival with a dismissive glance. Observer Serac, he said, emphasizing the demoted title. You arrived just in time to witness the implementation of true security. Aerith remained silent, taking his designated position at the periphery of the command center. From here, he could observe but not interfere, a position designed to humble him. Counselor Drex approached, his gelatinous form undulating with what passed for satisfaction in his species. The former prophet seemed subdued, Perhaps he finally recognizes the necessity of our action. Or perhaps, Corin replied, loud enough for Aerith to hear, he realizes the Council has finally recognized the limitations of his psychological profiling. Some species cannot be reasoned with. They can only be controlled or neutralized. The briefing proceeded with clinical efficiency. Strike teams reported readiness. Weapon systems were confirmed at optimal function. Planetary defense capabilities of the Umari were analyzed and dismissed as primitive. Through it all, Aerith remained motionless, his tendrils occasionally connecting to data ports to record observations. The operation will commence in 20 standard hours, Corin announced as the briefing concluded. All vessels are to maintain position and communication silence until the designated time. We will strike simultaneously at all 217 primary targets, with secondary and tertiary strikes to follow, based on initial damage assessment. As the command staff dispersed, Aerith approached Corin directly, an action that caused several nearby officers to tense in anticipation of conflict. Supreme Admiral, I request permission to access real-time observational data during the operation, Aerith said. Corin regarded him with what might have been amusement. Planning to document your failed predictions, observer? I wish to maintain the most accurate record possible of what transpires, Aerith replied evenly. For the historical archives, if nothing else. Granted, Corin said after a moment. It will be beneficial for the archives to document the success of this operation and the limitations of your predictive methodology. He turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. Captain Venn waited until they were alone in the transport shuttle, returning to the Stellar Observer before speaking. You have something planned, she said. Not a question, but a statement. Aerith's tendrils flickered briefly. I am an observer now, Captain. My role is simply to document. With full access to real-time data streams, she noted. Data streams that could theoretically be redirected. Aerith turned to face her directly. Captain Venn, I must remind you that interference with a consortium military operation is classified as a Category 1 offense. The penalties are severe. I'm aware, she replied. I'm also aware that what we're about to participate in violates the founding principles of the consortium. So I ask again, Prophet, what are you planning? For the first time since the council vote. Aerith's tendrils brightened slightly. I cannot ask you to risk your position or freedom, Captain, but I would not refuse assistance freely offered in the service of conscience. Venn nodded once. Decision made. My secondary communications array is undergoing routine maintenance. It will be offline from the primary monitoring systems for approximately 30 hours. A regrettable timing coincidence. Indeed, Aerith agreed. Most regrettable. The 12 hours before the operation began passed intense preparation. Aboard the Stellar Observer, Aerith established a private observation station in his quarters, connecting to the ship's sensors and the data streams Corin had authorized. Captain Venn ensured that the secondary communications array was properly malfunctioning and that certain surveillance systems were experiencing calibration issues. When the attack began, it came with the terrible efficiency the consortium military was known for. From orbit, 200 specialized strike craft descended into the Umari atmosphere, each targeting critical infrastructure. The planet's primitive defense systems, designed primarily for weather control and asteroid deflection, were overwhelmed within minutes. In his quarters, Aerith watched the destruction unfold across multiple displays. His tendrils connected directly to the data streams, recording everything, but also transmitting. Through the isolated communications array, carefully modified by Captain Venn, he sent targeted warning messages to specific locations on the planet's surface. The warnings were simple. This is not an accident or natural phenomenon. You are under attack by an external force. This will continue. Preserve knowledge. Adapt. Survive. He could not stop the attack, but he could ensure the Umari understood what was happening to them. Understanding was the first step toward the resilience he had predicted, and now, tragically, hoped for. The first wave of strikes lasted 14 hours, destroying most of the Umari's global communication networks, defense systems, and transportation hubs. Billions of the planet's inhabitants were thrown into confusion and panic. Their global governance structures, already fragmented by regional differences, collapsed under the pressure of a threat they could barely comprehend. When the consortium fleet regrouped to assess the damage and prepare the second wave of attacks, Corin called a briefing for all observation personnel. Aerith attended, his tendrils dim with the weight of what he had witnessed. "The initial phase has exceeded expectations," Corin announced, displaying holographic imagery of devastated Umari cities. 89% of targeted infrastructure has been neutralized. Their global communications are fragmented. Their limited space-based assets have been destroyed. They have no effective means to coordinate a meaningful response. The assembled officers nodded in approval, but Aerith noticed that several, including some from Corin's own species, seemed disturbed by the images of destruction. "The second phase will target their remaining technological production facilities," Corin continued. "We estimate this will reduce their civilization to a pre-industrial state within 72 hours. The operation is proceeding exactly as planned." "And the casualties?" Aerith asked, breaking protocol by speaking without being addressed. Corin's crest flared with irritation. "Within acceptable parameters, the precision of our strikes has limited collateral damage to less than 8% above projections." 8% represents millions of sentient beings, Aerith noted quietly. "Unfortunate, but necessary." Corin dismissed. "Observer Sirach, your role is to document, not to editorialize. If you cannot maintain professional detachment, you will be confined to your quarters for the remainder of the operation." Aerith inclined his head in a gesture of compliance, but his tendrils pulsed with a determination that made Captain Venn, watching from her position near the entrance, uncomfortable. She had never seen a Voxic display such intensity of purpose. The second wave of attacks began 18 hours later. This time, the strikes targeted manufacturing centers, research facilities, and educational institutions. The consortium's weapons were horrifyingly precise, capable of destroying specific buildings while leaving adjacent structures intact. This was not random destruction, but calculated regression, a surgical removal of technological capability. Throughout the assault, Aerith continued his covert transmissions to the planet's surface, but now he included more than warnings. Using his access to the fleet's tactical data, he provided information about the patterns of the attacks, the capabilities of the consortium weapons, and the intervals between strike waves. It was not enough to save most targets, but it allowed some Umari to evacuate critical knowledge, samples of their technology, and key personnel before destruction arrived. 3 days into the operation, as the consortium prepared for the third and final phase of attacks, Captain Venn entered Aerith's quarters without announcement. "We have a problem," she said, her voice tight with tension. "Communication monitors have detected anomalous transmissions originating from this vessel. The investigation hasn't traced them to you yet, but it's only a matter of time." Aerith disconnected from his data interfaces, his tendrils retracting. "How long do we have?" "Hours at most. Corin has dispatched security teams to all observation vessels. They're checking communication logs, access records, everything." "Then, my work here is finished," Aerith said, rising from his meditation platform. "Captain, you should distance yourself from me immediately. Claim no knowledge of my activities." Venn shook her head. "It's too late for that. My authorization codes were used to modify the communications array. I'm already implicated." "Then perhaps it is time for us both to take a more active role," Aerith suggested, his tendrils brightening with purpose. "The Umari have been responding to my transmissions. Some of their surviving leaders have established hidden communication nodes, They're adapting faster than even I predicted. What are you suggesting? The third phase of attacks targets their remaining population centers, a final demonstration of consortium power designed to traumatize survivors for generations. If we can delay or disrupt that attack, many millions of lives could be saved. Ven's expression hardened. That would be direct sabotage of a consortium military operation. It goes beyond providing information. The penalty would be— I am aware of the consequences, Aerith interrupted gently, which is why I will undertake this action alone. You have done enough, Captain. No, Ven said firmly. If we're going to do this, we do it together. What's your plan? Before Aerith could respond, an alert sounded throughout the ship. Security teams are boarding, Ven said, checking the ship's internal sensors. We're out of time. Aerith moved to the communication interface. Then we make our stand here. Help me establish a direct link to the Umari resistance. If I cannot stop this attack, I can at least ensure they are prepared for it. As consortium security forces moved through the Stellar Observer, Aerith and Captain Ven worked frantically to compile and transmit everything they knew about the planned third phase attacks. Targeting information, weapon capabilities, fleet positions, data that would normally be classified at the highest level, was compressed and sent through the modified communications array to the hiding places of Umari survivors. The security team reached Aerith's quarters just as the final transmission completed. When they burst through the door, weapons ready, they found the Prophet standing calmly beside Captain Ven, both making no move to resist. Prophet Aerith Sirach, Captain Lyra Ven, the security leader, announced formally. By authority of the Consortium Security Directive, you are both under arrest for unauthorized communication with a designated intervention target and sabotage of a Category 7 military operation. I acknowledge your authority, Aerith replied with dignity, and I accept full responsibility for these actions. Captain Ven acted under my influence and direction. That is false, Ven interjected immediately. I acted of my own free will and share equal responsibility. The security leader signaled to his team, who moved forward to apply neural restraints to both prisoners. You will be transported to the inevitable justice for preliminary hearing. Supreme Admiral Corrin will determine your immediate disposition while awaiting formal trial. As they were led from the Stellar Observer, Aerith noticed the way many of the crew watched their departure, not with contempt for traitors, but with the uncertain expressions of those questioning their own roles in the unfolding tragedy. The detention cell aboard the Inevitable Justice was designed to hold beings of various physiologies. For Aerith, it included a suppression field that limited the neural connections between his tendrils and any external data sources, a particularly uncomfortable restriction for a Voxic, akin to sensory deprivation for other species. Captain Ven was held separately, a standard procedure for co-conspirators. Aerith had no way of knowing her condition or location, which troubled him more than his own circumstances. She had risked everything to support his principles, a remarkable act of cross-species solidarity that touched him deeply. After 12 hours of isolation, the cell door dissolved, revealing Supreme Admiral Corrin flanked by 2 security officers. The Admiral entered alone, his massive form seeming to fill the small space entirely. I have reviewed the transmission logs, Corrin began without preamble. The extent of your betrayal exceeds even my expectations. Prophet. Aerith noted the use of his former title. An interesting choice. I acted in accordance with my conscience and my interpretation of consortium founding principles. You provided tactical information to a target civilization, Corrin countered, his armored exoskeleton clicking as he moved closer. Information they have already used to evacuate 3 facilities before our strikes could neutralize them. Your actions have extended this operation and potentially cost consortium lives. Have there been consortium casualties? Aerith asked, genuine concern in his voice. Not yet, Corrin admitted. But the final phase has been complicated by unexpected Umari resistance. They're demonstrating coordination that should be impossible, given the destruction of their communication infrastructure. Perhaps you underestimated them, Aerith suggested. As I warned the Council, you might. Corrin's crest flared with anger. I did not come here to debate. Your trial will be conducted after the operation concludes. Until then, you will remain in isolation. And Captain Ven? Her fate is not your concern. Aerith's tendrils curled inward, a gesture of resignation. Before you leave, Admiral, I would ask one thing. Has the Council been informed of our arrest? The head counselor has been notified, as protocol requires, Corrin replied. She expressed regret at your misguided actions, but affirmed the necessity of the operation. I see, Aerith said quietly. Then I have nothing more to say. Corrin studied him for a moment. You genuinely believe you were right, don't you? That these primitives deserve protection even at the cost of consortium security? I believe that how we treat emerging civilizations defines what kind of galactic community we are building, Aerith replied. And I believe that violence begets violence in a cycle that transcends technological differences. Philosophical idealism, Corrin dismissed. A luxury afforded to those who have never faced the realities of conflict. On the contrary, Aerith countered, my predictions are based on rigorous analysis of historical patterns across 17,000 years of recorded interspecies contact. Violence as first contact has never, not once, resulted in peaceful long-term relations. Corrin turned to leave. We'll see if your precious Umari conform to your patterns when they're struggling to rediscover basic metallurgy in the ruins of their civilization. After the Admiral departed, Aerith returned to his meditation platform, conserving energy and focusing his thoughts. Without access to external data, he could only wait and hope that his warnings had been sufficient to help the Umari prepare for what was coming. He did not have to wait long for an answer. 18 hours later, the entire vessel shuddered violently, throwing Aerith from his platform. Emergency alarms blared as the lights flickered, and stabilization systems struggled to compensate for what felt like multiple impacts. Through the neural suppression field, Aerith could sense chaotic data bursts, the kind generated during combat situations. The inevitable Justice, flagship of the consortium fleet, was under attack. The suppression field wavered as power fluctuated throughout the ship. In those brief moments of reduced restriction, Aerith's tendrils extended, desperately seeking connection to external information sources. He managed to capture fragments of tactical data, enough to piece together what was happening. The Umari had launched a counterattack, not from their devastated planet, but from previously unknown installations on their 2 moons and several orbital platforms that had been disguised as debris or natural formations. They had sacrificed their visible infrastructure to preserve hidden capabilities, a strategy Aerith had subtly suggested in his transmissions. More shocking than the existence of these hidden bases was what they contained. The Umari had reverse-engineered aspects of consortium technology from the very weapons used against them. Their counterattack utilized modified versions of the precision strike craft they had observed, devastating their world. The detention cell's door dissolved again, but this time it was not Corrin who entered. Captain Ven stood in the doorway, a commandeered weapon in her hand and determination on her face. We need to move quickly, she said, deactivating the suppression field with a security override. The flagship is taking heavy damage. Most security personnel have been called to defensive positions. Aerith rose immediately, his tendrils extending fully as neural connections were restored. The Umari, they've adapted faster than even I predicted. They've done more than adapt, Ven replied, leading him into the corridor. They're using some kind of disruption field that's interfering with consortium targeting systems. Multiple strike craft have been disabled without destruction. They're demonstrating restraint, Aerith noted with satisfaction, targeting military capabilities rather than seeking maximum casualties. The command center is in chaos, Ven continued, as they moved through the surprisingly empty corridors. Koran refused to believe the attacks were coming from the Umari at first. He was convinced it must be an outside force interfering with the operation. "Where are we going?" Aerith asked, as they entered a restricted section of the vessel. "The emergency communication hub," Ven explained. "If we can transmit evidence of what's happening to the full council, they might order a cessation of hostilities." The hub was deserted when they arrived, all personnel having been reassigned to combat stations. Ven secured the entrance, while Aerith connected directly to the communication systems, his tendrils interfacing with multiple data ports simultaneously. "The Umari attacks are precisely targeted," he observed, reviewing tactical data. "They're disabling weapon systems and drive capabilities without causing catastrophic damage to life support or crew quarters. This is not vengeful destruction. It's tactical neutralization." "Can you establish a connection to the council chamber?" Ven asked, checking the external corridor through a security monitor. "Yes, but it will be detected immediately," Aerith replied. "We'll have minutes at most before security overrides the access. Then make them count." Aerith initiated the connection, bypassing standard authorization protocols with emergency override codes. The holographic projection system activated, creating a direct link to the Consortium Council chamber, light years away. The head counselor's crystalline form appeared immediately, facets reflecting surprise at the unauthorized communication. "Prophet Serac, Captain Ven, our information indicated you were in detention pending trial. Honored Counselor, I must report a significant development in the Umari intervention." Aerith began formally. "The operation has resulted in unexpected consequences that validate my original concerns." He transmitted the tactical data showing the Umari counterattack, highlighting the precision and restraint demonstrated in their targeting. "As you can see, the Umari have not only survived our first strikes, but have adapted our own technologies against us, exactly as my predictive model suggested." The head counselor's form shifted as she processed the information. "Where is Supreme Admiral Koran? Why is he not reporting this development?" "The Admiral is currently attempting to manage the defense of the fleet," Ven interjected. "Multiple consortium vessels have been disabled, including partial systems on the flagship. Casualties have been minimal due to the precise nature of the Umari attacks." "This is most disturbing," the head counselor replied. "The Council authorized a preventative action based on the understanding that the Umari posed no current threat to consortium forces." "With respect, Counselor," Aerith said, his tendrils pulsing with urgency. "The threat emerged as a direct result of our aggression. My analysis predicted this specific outcome, that an unprovoked attack would trigger unprecedented adaptation and unification among the Umari." A security alert flashed on the communication console. "We have less than 2 minutes before we're locked out," Ven warned. "Counselor, I formally request an emergency session of the full council to reconsider the Umari intervention," Aerith stated. "The current strategy has failed and will continue to escalate conflict if pursued." The head counselor was silent for a moment, her crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that indicated deep consideration. "Your request is noted. Prophet Serac, the council will—" The communication abruptly terminated as security protocols reasserted control. Simultaneously, the door to the hub began to dissolve as override commands were executed. "We need to move," Ven urged, checking her weapon. "Security will be here in moments." "No," Aerith said calmly. "We've done what we can. I will not flee or resist further. The evidence has been transmitted to the Council. What happens next is their decision." When security forces entered the communication hub, they found Prophet Aerith Serac and Captain Lyra Ven waiting calmly, offering no resistance. They were returned to detention, but with a crucial difference: they were held together rather than separately, an indication that the security protocols had been modified. 6 hours later, As the battle outside continued to escalate, Supreme Admiral Corrin himself came to their cell. His armored exoskeleton showed damage, and one of his four arms hung uselessly at his side, evidence of direct combat. "The Council has called an emergency session," he announced, without preamble. "Your transmission has caused considerable concern about the operation's direction." "Have you ordered a ceasefire?" Aerith asked. "I do not take orders from traitors," Corrin snapped. "The operation continues. We have adapted our targeting systems to counter their disruption fields. The next wave of attacks will neutralize their hidden bases." "Admiral," Aerith said gently, "you have already lost. Even if you destroy every Umari installation, you have taught them something far more dangerous than any technology. You have taught them to fear external contact and to prioritize defensive capability above all else. They will rebuild with that lesson embedded in their cultural memory." "They will rebuild nothing," Corrin insisted. "When this is finished, they will—" An explosion rocked the vessel, more powerful than any previous impact. Emergency containment fields activated throughout the ship as warning sirens blared. "Admiral Corrin to Command Center," came an urgent voice over the internal communication system. "We have multiple breaches. Boarding parties have been detected in sections 7 through 12. Corrin's crest flared with shock. "Boarding parties? Impossible!" "The Umari continue to exceed your expectations," Aerith observed, "as I warned they would." Before Corrin could respond, the detention field deactivated, and the cell door dissolved. Standing in the corridor was a being unlike any Aerith had ever encountered directly, though he had studied them extensively. "An Umari!" The being stood upright on two legs, its body covered in a form-fitting protective suit that appeared to incorporate elements of consortium technology. Its face was partially visible through a transparent section of its helmet, bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes, and skin with a bluish tint that matched the dominant Umari phenotype. More surprising than its appearance was the device it carried, a modified version of a consortium neural disruptor, currently pointed directly at Supreme Admiral Corrin. "You are the commander?" the Umari asked. Its voice processed through what appeared to be a hastily constructed translation device. Corrin's massive form tensed, clearly calculating the possibility of overpowering the intruder. "I am Supreme Admiral Corrin of the Galactic Knowledge Consortium. Your actions constitute an act of war against 17 advanced civilizations. Your attack on our world constituted an act of war first," the Umari replied evenly. "We are High Elder Mal of the United Umari Resistance. You will come with us." Two more Umari appeared in the corridor, similarly armed. Corrin's crest flattened against his head, a sign of fury in his species. "I will not be taken prisoner by primitives." "You have two options," High Elder Mal stated. "Accompany us voluntarily to negotiate terms, or we will disable you and take you regardless. We have already secured 12 of your command staff. The choice is yours." Aerith stepped forward, his tendrils extended in the formal greeting posture of his kind. "High Elder, I am Prophet Aerith Sarak. I sent the warnings to your people." Mal studied him for a moment, then inclined their head slightly. "The Resistance received your transmissions. They saved many lives and gave us time to prepare. For that, you have our gratitude." "The Consortium Council has convened an emergency session," Aerith explained. "There is an opportunity to end this conflict through negotiation rather than further violence." "That is why we are here," Mal replied. "We will present our terms directly to your leadership." The Elder turned back to Quran. "Your decision, Admiral." For a tense moment, it seemed Corrin might choose resistance. Then, with visible reluctance, he lowered his three functioning arms in a gesture of compliance. "I will accompany you under protest. This illegal boarding action will not stand." "Neither did the illegal attack on our world," Mal responded. "Yet here we are." As they were led through the corridors of the damaged flagship, Aerith witnessed something extraordinary. Consortium security personnel, and Umari resistance fighters, working together to stabilize critical systems and treat the injured of both species. The Umari had not come solely as warriors, but had brought medical personnel and technical specialists. "Your people show remarkable compassion toward those who attacked them," Aerith observed to Maul as they walked. "Vengeance is a luxury we cannot afford," the elder replied. "We need to understand why you attacked and ensure it never happens again. Killing your people would provide no answers." They reached the main hangar bay, where an Umari vessel waited, a hybrid craft that appeared to incorporate salvaged consortium technology into an indigenous design. Around it, more Umari worked alongside consortium technical staff, coordinating the evacuation of critically injured personnel. "We will transport you to a neutral location where representatives of your council can meet with our remaining leadership," Maul explained. "Captain Ven has agreed to help facilitate communication." Ven nodded confirmation. "The council has approved the meeting. A diplomatic vessel is already en route." Koran's damaged exoskeleton rattled with barely contained rage. "This humiliation will not be forgotten. The consortium does not negotiate with equals," Maul interrupted. "That perception is precisely what we must address. Admiral, your technological advantage did not prevent this outcome. Perhaps it is time to reconsider your assessment of our civilization." As they boarded the Umari vessel, Aerith felt a profound sense of validation, mixed with sorrow. His predictions had proven accurate, but at a terrible cost. Millions of Umari had died. Their planet's infrastructure lay in ruins, and the path to peaceful relations would now be infinitely more complex. Yet, there was also hope. The Umari had demonstrated not only remarkable resilience and adaptive capability, but also a capacity for restraint that exceeded even Aerith's optimistic projections. They had fought back not to destroy, but to force recognition and negotiation. The neutral location chosen for the emergency council meeting was Orinthia itself, the diplomatic planet where the original decision to attack the Umari had been made. As the Umari vessel approached, Aerith observed the gathering of ships in orbit, not just consortium vessels, but representatives from several independent civilizations who had been called to witness the unprecedented proceedings. In the Great Conference Hall, the full Consortium Council assembled, along with the surviving leadership of the Umari resistance. Supreme Admiral Koran and his senior staff were present, not as commanders, but as witnesses to the consequences of their actions. Captain Ven stood with Aerith, both having been formally released from detention pending a complete investigation. The head counselor opened the proceedings with a formal acknowledgement of the situation's gravity. "We gather in extraordinary circumstances to address a conflict that has raised fundamental questions about our principles and protocols. The consortium authorized a preventative action against the Umari civilization based on strategic assessments that have proven to be critically flawed." Koran's crest flared in protest, but a warning glance from the counselor silenced him. "The Umari have demonstrated capabilities and ethical restraint that merit full recognition," she continued. "High Elder Maul, you have requested this forum to present terms for cessation of hostilities. The Council recognizes your right to speak." Maul stepped forward, having removed their protective helmet to reveal features that were both alien and expressively familiar to the assembled delegates. "We come not seeking vengeance but understanding and assurance. Our world lies in ruins. Millions of our people have perished. Yet we do not desire the destruction of your consortium in return." The Elder activated a holographic display showing the devastation of major Umari cities. "These are the consequences of your preventative action. Cities that stood for thousands of years, reduced to ash. Knowledge accumulated over centuries, lost. Lives, each one unique and irreplaceable, extinguished." The display shifted to show Umari medical teams treating injured consortium personnel. "And yet, when we gained the capability to strike back, we chose precision over destruction. We disabled rather than destroyed. We captured rather than killed. Not from weakness, but from the strength of our conviction that violence begets only more violence. The elder's gaze swept the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. Our terms are simple: immediate withdrawal of all consortium forces from our system, formal recognition of Umari sovereignty and right to technological development, reparations to assist in rebuilding what was destroyed, and the establishment of a mutual defense protocol to ensure such an attack never occurs again, against us or any other emerging civilization. A murmur passed through the council at the boldness of these terms. Councillor Drex, Corin's longtime supporter, rose to object. The consortium cannot be held responsible for the unforeseen consequences of a security operation authorized by this council. The level of reparations implied would be unprecedented, as was the level of destruction inflicted upon a pre-contact civilization. Aerith interjected, speaking without recognition. Honored councillors, I must remind you that I predicted these precise outcomes before the operation began. The consequences were not unforeseen. They were deliberately ignored. The head councillor signaled for order. Prophet Serac speaks truth. The council records confirm his warnings were explicitly entered into evidence before the vote to authorize the operation. And I would add, Captain Venn said, stepping forward, that the Umari response has validated every element of the Prophet's psychological assessment. They unified against external threat. They adapted our technologies with remarkable speed, and they demonstrated the exact pattern of resilience he predicted. Supreme Admiral Koran finally broke his silence. This is absurd. We face no obligation to a species that has illegally captured consortium military personnel and vessels. The appropriate response is to regroup our forces and complete the operation as planned. High Elder Male turned to face the Admiral directly. Is that truly your recommendation, Admiral? After witnessing our capability to disable your flagship and capture your command staff, after seeing that we could have destroyed your fleet but chose not to, would you recommend escalation, knowing that every surviving Umari is now dedicated to defense against external threats? Before Koran could respond, Aerith moved to the center of the chamber, his tendrils fully extended in the formal posture of truth-speaking among his kind. Counselors, what we witness today is the consequence of violating our most sacred principle, that emerging civilizations have the right to develop without interference. We attacked the Umari based on a projection of what they might become, and in doing so, we have guaranteed they will become exactly what we feared, a species whose cultural memory is defined by external threat. His tendrils pulsed with the blue-white energy of absolute conviction. But there is still a path forward. The Umari have shown remarkable restraint and wisdom. They seek not destruction, but recognition and security. We have an opportunity to transform this tragedy into the foundation for a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than dominance. The head counselor's crystalline form reflected the light in patterns indicating deep consideration. The council will recess to deliberate on the Umari terms. Prophet Serac, your insight will be required during these deliberations. High Elder Mal, we request your patience as we consider the path forward. As the formal session adjourned, the various delegations broke into smaller groups for private consultations. Aerith found himself approached by both Captain Venn and High Elder Mal. Your advocacy is appreciated, Prophet, Mal said. But I sense reluctance among many of your council members. Change comes slowly to a body representing 17 diverse civilizations, Aerith acknowledged. But the evidence before them is compelling. Your people's response has demonstrated a level of ethical development that many in the consortium had not anticipated. We had good teachers, Mal replied, with what Aerith recognized as the Umari expression of ironic humor. Your warnings gave us not just tactical information, but insight into your consortium's thinking. We knew that simply fighting back would only confirm your fears about us. We had to show restraint even in self-defense. Captain Ven studied the elder with open curiosity. Your adaptation rate exceeds anything in our historical records. How did you reverse engineer our technology so quickly? We didn't. Not entirely, Maul explained. We had already developed theoretical frameworks for many of the principles your weapons demonstrated. Seeing them in action allowed us to bridge gaps in our understanding that might have taken decades through conventional research. Necessity accelerated innovation. Their conversation was interrupted by a summons. The council had reached a preliminary decision more quickly than anticipated. As they returned to the main chamber, Aerith noticed that Supreme Admiral Corrin was conspicuously absent. The head counselor's form seemed to have gained additional facets during the recess, a sign of heightened cognitive processing in her species. After consultation with representatives of all member civilizations, the Council has reached a unanimous decision regarding the Umari situation. The chamber fell silent as delegates from both sides awaited the verdict. The consortium acknowledges that the preventative action against the Umari civilization violated our founding principles and was based on flawed strategic assessments. The head counselor began. We accept the terms presented by High Elder Maul, with the following modifications. Reparations will be provided in the form of technological and humanitarian assistance, rather than direct resource transfers. The Mutual Defense Protocol will be established as part of a broader non-aggression agreement, and a consortium observation post will be established in the Umari system with the sole purpose of facilitating peaceful exchange of knowledge. High Elder Maul conferred briefly with other Umari representatives before responding. These modifications are acceptable, provided that the observation post is jointly operated and that technological assistance includes full disclosure of capabilities used against us. Agreed, the head counselor replied. Additionally, the Council has enacted two significant policy changes as a result of this incident. First, Prophet Aerith Serak is reinstated to his position with expanded authority to review all potential intervention operations. Second, Supreme Admiral Corrin has been relieved of command pending a full investigation of his actions before and during this conflict. A ripple of surprise passed through the assembly. The removal of a Supreme Admiral was unprecedented in recent consortium history. This conflict has forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our practices and principles. The head counselor continued. The Umari have demonstrated that technological development does not necessarily correlate with ethical development. In either direction, we have much to learn from one another. High Elder Maul stepped forward. Extending a hand in what they had clearly learned was a formal gesture among several consortium species. Then, let this learning begin, not with fear, but with mutual respect. The formal signing of the Orinthia Peace Accord took place 3 cycles later. After intensive negotiations to establish specific protocols for reparations, technological exchange, and security guarantees, representatives from all consortium member civilizations attended, along with a larger delegation of Umari leaders who had emerged from hiding after the cessation of hostilities. Prophet Aerith Serak, fully restored to his position and granted new authority to oversee first contact protocols, stood with Captain Ven as they watched the proceedings. Your predictions were accurate after all, Ven observed quietly. Though I suspect even you didn't anticipate how quickly events would unfold. The Umari exceeded my most optimistic projections, Aerith acknowledged, his tendrils pulsing with the calm blue of satisfaction. Their capacity for adaptive thinking under pressure is remarkable. They will make valuable allies. And formidable enemies, came a voice from behind them. They turned to find Supreme Admiral Corrin, now bearing the diminished title of Strategic Advisor, approaching with a formal escort. His damaged arm had been replaced with a prosthetic that bore Umari design elements, a visible symbol of the new relationship between the civilizations. Admiral, Aerith greeted him neutrally. I did not expect your presence at the signing. The Council determined that my perspective would be valuable in establishing realistic security protocols. Corin replied, his tone subdued. And I requested the opportunity to witness this historic occasion. Have your views on the Umari changed? Ven asked directly. Corin's crest shifted in a pattern Aerith recognized as complex ambivalence. I maintain that my assessment of potential threat was sound, based on available information. However, I acknowledge that my recommended response was disproportionate and ultimately counterproductive. He gestured toward the Umari delegation with his prosthetic arm. Their medical team saved my life when they could have easily allowed me to perish from my injuries. Such behavior merits consideration. It is the beginning of understanding, Aerith said gently. Not fear of their capabilities, but appreciation of their choices. Karan studied him for a moment. You were right, Prophet. Your exact words have been replaying in my mind since my capture. If we strike first, they will never stop. The Umari did not stop, but neither did they destroy when they had the chance. That distinction matters. As Corin moved away to join his assigned delegation, Ven turned to Aerith with surprise. That was as close to an apology as I've ever heard from a Draxus. It is progress, Aerith agreed. Slow, reluctant progress, but meaningful nonetheless. The ceremony proceeded with the formal exchange of signatory confirmations. As High Elder Mal and the head counselor completed the final validation, a chime sounded throughout the chamber, signaling the official implementation of the accord. In that moment, Aerith felt a complex resonance through his neural network, the satisfaction of validation mixed with the sorrow of knowing how much suffering could have been avoided. His analysis had been correct, but that correctness had come at a terrible price. What happens now? Ven asked, as the assembled delegations began to disperse into more informal groupings. Now comes the more difficult work, Aerith replied. Rebuilding trust, establishing genuine exchange, learning to see one another as equals despite our differences. And your role in this new arrangement? Aerith's tendrils brightened slightly. The Council has appointed me to oversee a new interspecies cultural exchange program. I will be working directly with High Elder Mal to establish protocols for mutual understanding between our civilizations. A fitting assignment, Ven nodded. And perhaps a model for future first contacts? That is my hope, Aerith acknowledged. That we learn from this tragedy how to approach emerging civilizations, not with fear of what they might become, but with respect for what they already are. As they watched Umari and consortium representatives beginning the delicate dance of post-conflict diplomacy, Aerith reflected on the cycle of violence his warning had tried to prevent. If you strike first, they'll never stop, had been proven true, but with an unexpected corollary. The Umari had not stopped, but they had chosen a different path than endless retribution. They had fought not for vengeance, but for recognition and security. In that choice lay the hope for a new approach to interspecies relations, one based not on preemptive fear, but on mutual respect and the recognition that true security could never be achieved through domination. The path forward would not be easy. Millions of Umari still grieved their losses. Many in the consortium still harbored suspicions about the wisdom of embracing a civilization that had demonstrated such rapid military adaptation. But the alternative, continuing a cycle of escalating violence, had been rejected by both sides. As High Elder Mal approached to discuss the details of their joint assignment, Aerith extended his tendrils in the formal greeting of equals. The Elder responded with their own cultural gesture of respect, a small circle traced over the heart. Prophet Sirach, Mal said, we have much work ahead of us. Indeed we do, Elder, Aerith agreed. But we begin with the most important foundation, the understanding that even across the vast differences between our kinds, we share a common desire for peace. Peace, Mal corrected gently, with security. One without the other cannot endure. Aerith's tendrils pulsed in acknowledgement of the wisdom in those words. Then, Let us build both, together. And so began the next chapter, in the relationship between the Umari and the consortium. A relationship born in conflict, but transformed through wisdom into something that would ultimately strengthen both civilizations. The prophet's warning had been validated, but its darkest implications had been overcome by the very quality he had recognized in the Umari from the beginning: their extraordinary capacity for adaptation, not just technologically, but ethically. If you strike first, they'll never stop. But how they continue, and what they become in that continuation, remained a choice. In that choice lay the difference between endless cycles of violence and the harder, more rewarding path of reconciliation and growth. It was a lesson the consortium would not soon forget.